It all started on a quiet morning in a neighborhood where everyone knew each other's routines. The streets were lined with small trees that swayed gently in the wind, and the houses had neat gardens and freshly painted fences. Life moved slowly here, the kind of place where neighbors would wave as they passed, and children played outside until the streetlights flickered on. For the homeowner, mornings began with a cup of coffee on the porch, enjoying the peaceful sounds of birds and distant traffic. It was a life that felt calm, familiar, and predictable. That peace, however, was about to be disturbed in a way that no one could have imagined. The trouble began subtly, almost imperceptibly. One morning, the homeowner noticed a small note tucked under the windshield wiper of the car parked in the driveway. The handwriting was neat but firm. It said something about the driveway being in the wrong place and hinted that it might cause problems if left as it was. At first, it was easy to dismiss. People sometimes made mistakes, and the homeowner assumed it was a neighbor being overly cautious or misinformed. Still, it planted a seed of discomfort, a small prick of unease that lingered longer than expected. Days passed. Similar notes appeared sporadically. They were polite on the surface but carried an unmistakable tone of authority, as if someone believed they had the right to dictate how another person should use their property. The homeowner read each note carefully, trying to remain calm. It was strange, even absurd, but nothing had escalated beyond written words yet. Still, the feeling that someone was watching, critiquing, and judging every move began to weigh heavily. Mornings that once began with the smell of fresh coffee now carried tension, and the simple act of parking in the driveway became a small, stressful ritual. The situation took a turn one afternoon when the neighbor, known for being outspoken, came directly to the homeowner's door. She was a woman in her 50s, always impeccably dressed, and carried herself as though she owned not just the street, but the whole block. Her eyes scanned the property critically, as though measuring and inspecting everything. Without waiting for an invitation, she launched into a monologue about the driveway. She claimed it was too wide, that it blocked her view of the street, and suggested that it caused a safety hazard. The homeowner tried to respond calmly, explaining that the driveway had been there for years, was properly documented, and posed no danger. But the neighbor was relentless. She waved dismissively at the homeowner's words and left, promising that something would be done if the situation didn't change at first. The homeowner told friends and family about the encounter, hoping someone would offer a simple explanation or a way to make peace. But most people found the situation unusual. "Why would someone care so much about your driveway?" a friend asked over the phone. It was a question that seemed reasonable. Yet as the days went on, the answer became more obvious. It wasn't about reason, it was about control. The neighbor wanted to impose her will, to dictate how everyone around her should live. Even if it made no sense, the homeowner tried to keep life as normal as possible. Morning coffee remained a small ritual, and small chores were done with quiet diligence. But the tension grew. Notes evolved into verbal confrontations when the neighbor encountered the homeowner on the street. She would wave a finger, pointing to the driveway, lecturing on how it should be better managed or properly aligned. The homeowner tried to remain patient, explaining politely that the driveway was part of the property and perfectly legal. The responses were met with rolling eyes and sharp words, leaving the homeowner both frustrated and bewildered. It was as if every explanation was irrelevant. The neighbor had already decided who was right, and it was not the homeowner. Neighbors began noticing the friction too. Casual greetings in the street became awkward pauses. Some would glance over curiously when the two exchanged words, sensing the tension like a storm cloud hanging over the quiet street. Children stopped lingering near the sidewalk where the argument often took place. Even mail carriers seemed to move quickly, aware that confrontation might be nearby. The homeowner felt increasingly isolated, though family and friends offered support from a distance. There was no direct danger, only the daily mental strain of dealing with someone determined to assert control in unreasonable ways. One afternoon, the homeowner returned from a short trip to find the driveway partially blocked by a set of cones and a temporary barrier. It was subtle, not overtly aggressive, but deliberate enough to be noticed. The homeowner's first instinct was disbelief. Who would put barriers on a driveway without permission? Soon the answer became clear. The neighbor had taken it upon herself to mark the driveway, making a statement without asking or informing anyone. When the homeowner tried to move the cones, the neighbor appeared on the porch across the street, shaking her head and muttering about rules and responsibilities. The homeowner realized that the conflict had escalated from words to actions, and the stakes were no longer just notes and warnings, they were tangible. Visible acts of control in the days that followed, small acts of intimidation continued. The neighbor would make comments to delivery drivers, suggesting that parking in the driveway was prohibited. She would stand outside and watch whenever a car arrived, giving disapproving looks. The homeowner tried to remain calm, documenting each incident in case legal action became necessary. It was exhausting, a constant vigilance over something that should have been simple and peaceful. Even the act of stepping outside became fraught with anxiety. As each encounter might escalate into an argument, friends suggested avoiding confrontation entirely. But the homeowner realized that ignoring the behavior only encouraged it. The more tolerance was shown, the more the neighbor seemed emboldened. There was a clear lesson forming. Those who thrive on control rarely back down when faced with polite explanations. The homeowner began researching local laws, property boundaries, and legal rights, preparing for a situation that seemed to be growing beyond neighborly squabbles. Each note, each verbal confrontation, and each silent stare was now a part of a larger pattern, one that could not be dismissed or ignored. The neighborhood itself became a backdrop to this tension. It was a place that had been quiet, where children's laughter once mingled with the sounds of morning routines. Now, there was a subtle shift. Neighbors began whispering about what was happening, curious and slightly wary. Some offered sympathetic smiles to the homeowner, others nodded politely at the neighbor, unsure how to intervene. Life continued, but with an undercurrent of unease. A reminder that peace is fragile and can be disturbed by even one person determined to assert authority in a misguided way. It was during this period of escalating tension that the homeowner had a realization. The conflict was no longer just about a driveway. It had become about respect, boundaries, and standing up for oneself. Each morning, the simple act of stepping into the driveway carried a weight that should not have existed. Yet it also offered an opportunity for resilience. The homeowner understood that the path forward would require patience, documentation, and sometimes quiet courage. Small victories like calmly explaining the legality of the driveway or politely asking the neighbor to respect. Boundaries became necessary steps in reclaiming peace. The first part of this story closes on that note, with a mix of frustration and determination. The quiet street remained the same in appearance, with its trees and gardens unchanged, yet the energy within it had shifted. A simple driveway, once a mundane aspect of daily life, had become the center of an unspoken battle. And while the neighbor's desire for control had grown, so too had the homeowner's resolve. What started as minor irritation had begun to lay the foundation for a larger confrontation, one that would eventually bring the dispute into the realm of legal authority. In those early days, the homeowner often sat on the porch in the evenings, reflecting on how quickly peace could be disrupted. The streetlights cast long shadows across the driveway, and the quiet hum of distant traffic mixed with the occasional chirp of crickets. It was a time for contemplation, for gathering strength, and for preparing for the challenges ahead. The driveway was more than concrete, and asphalt had become a symbol of personal boundaries, of the right to live peacefully, without interference. And though the story was only beginning, the first chapter had already set the tone. Patience, observation, and preparation would be the keys to facing the challenges that lay ahead. The days after the first encounters were tense, but the situation soon became more complicated. What had started as a few notes and brief confrontations turned into a constant presence in the homeowner's life. The neighbor, now more assertive, began to act as if she had authority over not only the driveway, but the entire street. It was subtle at first, just comments or sharp looks, but the tone was clear. She wanted to control the situation completely. Delivery drivers noticed it quickly. Packages that once arrived without issue were delayed or left on the curb because the neighbor told drivers not to use the driveway. Mail carriers sometimes hesitated at the end of the street, shifting packages from hand to hand before deciding where to leave them. The homeowner had to step outside to reassure the drivers, offering polite explanations and sometimes pointing out the legal access to the property. Each interaction felt like a small battle. The homeowner had to muster patience again and again. Attempts to reason with the neighbor were met with dismissiveness. Every time the homeowner explained property boundaries or showed documents proving the driveway was fully legal, the neighbor would wave the explanations away. She seemed convinced that personal belief outweighed official records. Her tone was sharp, her words carefully chosen to make it seem like the homeowner was the one causing trouble. Rules exist for a reason, she would say, and everyone should follow them. But when pressed for specifics, she couldn't produce a law or ordinance supporting her claims. It was clear she had no interest in compromise, only in asserting dominance. The homeowner started keeping a detailed record of each encounter. Notes were made about conversations, dates, and times. And photos were taken whenever the neighbor moved objects or left notes on the driveway. It was tedious work, but necessary. With each new incident, the homeowner felt a growing sense of responsibility to protect not only the property, but also peace of mind. The stakes had changed. What had been a minor annoyance now required careful attention and preparation. One afternoon, the neighbor took her actions a step further. She positioned a large sign near the driveway, printed with bold letters warning that the area was under surveillance, and that vehicles were not allowed to block the street. It was unnecessary and exaggerated. As the driveway was clearly on private property, the homeowner felt a mix of anger and disbelief. Who puts up a sign on someone else's property? It was a clear escalation, a challenge that could no longer be ignored. Calm explanations had failed. The situation was growing beyond personal confrontation and into something that might require formal intervention. Neighbors started to notice the escalation. Casual greetings in passing became cautious exchanges, with glances toward the driveway to see what was happening. Children who once played freely on the sidewalk now stayed closer to home, and some neighbors whispered to each other about the increasing tension. It was a subtle shift in the community, and though no one openly took sides, there was a shared understanding that something unusual was unfolding. The homeowner felt the weight of scrutiny, realizing that the conflict was no longer private, it had spilled into public view. Drawing the attention of everyone on the street, the homeowner continued to respond with patience. But it was becoming increasingly difficult. Every day involved new challenges: moving delivery trucks blocked by the neighbor, addressing complaints she made to local officials, and diffusing tense verbal exchanges in the street. It required constant vigilance. One morning, a worker for a utility company arrived to perform a routine check, only to be stopped by the neighbor, who insisted they needed permission from her first. The worker looked confused and turned to the homeowner for confirmation. It was exhausting, the homeowner thought, to repeatedly explain something so simple to someone who refused to listen. One evening, the homeowner tried to approach the neighbor calmly. Standing on the porch, the homeowner explained that the driveway had been legally established years ago, that it met all codes, and that blocking it or creating unnecessary obstacles was not acceptable. The neighbor smiled in a way that was both condescending and deliberate. She nodded slowly, as if pretending to consider the words, then turned and walked away without answering. It was a small victory in that the conversation remained civil, but it also made clear that reasoning alone would not solve the problem. The neighbor's need for control was stronger than logic or evidence. The homeowner's frustration grew, but so did determination. The situation was no longer a simple disagreement. It had become a test of endurance. Each day required careful planning to avoid unnecessary conflicts, but also preparation to address incidents that could not be avoided. The homeowner considered the possibility of legal measures. Understanding that documenting every interaction might become important, it was a delicate balance between protecting property, maintaining peace, and avoiding escalation that could reflect poorly on anyone involved. Tensions reached a new peak when the neighbor began interfering with the homeowner's visitors. Friends and family who came for short visits were greeted with sharp remarks, warnings not to park in the driveway, and passive-aggressive gestures. Some visitors, unsure how to respond, moved their cars to the street, while others argued briefly before leaving. Each incident left the homeowner feeling both embarrassed and powerless. The neighbor's desire for control extended beyond just the driveway. It affected relationships, social interactions, and the sense of safety within the home. The homeowner began to observe patterns. The neighbors seemed to thrive on small victories, public displays of authority, and the discomfort of others. Every interaction was an opportunity for her to assert dominance. At the same time, the homeowner learned the importance of remaining calm and measured. Emotional reactions, anger, or aggressive responses only fueled the conflict. Patience, documentation, and polite firmness became essential tools. The homeowner realized that winning this struggle would require a careful mix of restraint and preparation. Not confrontation alone. One particularly tense afternoon, the neighbor approached the homeowner while moving a set of traffic cones back onto the driveway. She spoke in a tone that suggested finality, claiming that rules must be followed and warning that she could call authorities if the situation did not improve. The homeowner remained calm, explaining that the cones were unnecessary and that the driveway was legally part of the property. The neighbor shook her head, unconvinced, and left with a warning glance. It was clear that intimidation was now a primary strategy. The homeowner understood that facts alone would not sway someone determined to impose control. Neighbors continued to watch quietly, aware of the escalating tension. Some offered small words of encouragement to the homeowner, while others avoided any involvement. It was a subtle shift in the neighborhood dynamics, where casual interactions were colored by caution and observation. The homeowner felt the weight of these silent witnesses, recognizing that maintaining composure was as important as asserting legal rights. Every encounter was a performance, a test of patience, and an opportunity to show that calm reasoning could prevail over aggression. The homeowner also began to reflect on the neighbor's behavior. It was not simply about rules, property, or even the driveway itself. It was about control, authority, and the need to dominate situations regardless of reason. Understanding this helped the homeowner approach the problem strategically. Rather than reacting emotionally, the focus shifted to planning, documentation, and careful communication. Every note, every interaction, and every attempt to maintain civility was now part of a larger strategy to resolve the situation peacefully. Yet firmly, the next challenge arrived unexpectedly. A local official visited the neighborhood to investigate a complaint the neighbor had filed about the driveway. The complaint was vague and exaggerated, claiming safety hazards that did not exist. The homeowner met the official politely, providing clear evidence of property lines, permits, and documentation that proved the driveway was legal and safe. The neighbor was present as well, insisting that her interpretation of the situation was correct. The official listened carefully, reviewed the evidence, and confirmed that the homeowner's account was accurate. It was a small but important victory, showing that facts and preparation could counter false claims. Despite this, the neighbor continued to push boundaries. She left new notes, repositioned obstacles, and confronted delivery drivers. It became clear that simply winning in a factual sense was not enough. The situation required ongoing vigilance, careful planning, and a commitment to maintain calm in the face of continued provocation. The homeowner recognized that the road ahead would be long, but also understood that persistence, patience, and clear boundaries were the keys to regaining peace. The tension in the neighborhood was now palpable. Conversations between neighbors included cautious glances toward the driveway, and subtle comments hinted at the growing drama. It was a delicate balance between maintaining everyday life and navigating an ongoing conflict that affected everyone nearby. The homeowner felt a growing sense of responsibility to handle the situation carefully, to avoid unnecessary escalation, and to ensure that the conflict did not spiral out of control. Through it all, the homeowner found strength in routine. Morning coffee on the porch remained a small but essential act of self-care, a moment of reflection before the day began. Documenting incidents, speaking calmly to neighbors, and responding thoughtfully to the neighbors' provocations became part of a daily rhythm. The homeowner realized that persistence and patience were more powerful than anger or confrontation, and that careful planning could turn even a frustrating situation into an opportunity for control over one's own life. By the end of this period, the homeowner had learned several important lessons. First, people who crave control often act aggressively and disregard facts, expecting others to comply. Second, documentation, preparation, and calm responses are essential tools in navigating conflict. And third, maintaining composure in the face of provocation is not a sign of weakness, but of strength and strategy. The driveway, once a simple part of daily life, had become a symbol of personal boundaries, patience, and the ability to stand firm without aggression. Part 2 closes with a sense of both tension and determination. The neighbor had escalated her behavior, acting as if she owned not just the driveway but the neighborhood itself. But the homeowner had adapted, developing strategies to manage the conflict, protect property, and maintain peace of mind. The story of this small suburban struggle was far from over, but the homeowner had shown resilience, patience, and careful thinking in the face of unreasonable demands. The stage was now set for the next phase, where boundaries would be tested further, and the limits of patience and strategy would be explored even more deeply by the time the homeowner realized how far the conflict had escalated. The neighbor's actions had moved beyond words and minor obstacles. It was no longer about polite notes or tense conversations. Now there were deliberate acts that directly interfered with daily life, creating stress and anxiety that could not be ignored. The driveway, a simple stretch of concrete that had existed peacefully for years, had become the epicenter of an ongoing battle. One morning, the homeowner stepped outside to find the driveway partially blocked with large garbage bins, placed in a deliberate pattern. The arrangement made it nearly impossible to park a car or leave the property without maneuvering carefully. It was not an accident. It was a message. The homeowner felt a mix of frustration and disbelief. Who could think that leaving bins on someone else's property would be an acceptable way to settle a disagreement? Yet here it was. A clear escalation from passive-aggressive notes and verbal lectures to direct interference. The homeowner calmly documented the situation. Photos were taken from multiple angles, capturing the bins, the position of the driveway, and even the surrounding street to show it was clearly private property. The goal was to remain prepared, knowing that these actions might need to be presented to local authorities or, eventually, a judge. It was a tedious process, but the homeowner had learned that patience and preparation were essential in dealing with someone determined to assert control. The neighbor, seeing that her actions had caused disruption, appeared from her porch across the street. She watched silently as the homeowner carefully moved the bins to the edge of the property. Her presence was deliberate, meant to convey that she was monitoring every move. The homeowner maintained composure, continuing with calm and methodical actions, refusing to react emotionally. It was a small victory in restraint, though the tension was palpable. The neighbor seemed to enjoy testing boundaries, and each measured response from the homeowner appeared to frustrate her. As the days passed, the interference became more frequent. New obstacles appeared overnight. Cones, small fences, even temporary signage claiming that the driveway was a restricted area. Local delivery drivers began calling the homeowner for clarification before leaving packages. Hesitant to risk confrontation with the neighbor, friends and family visiting the home were briefed on the situation and often reminded to park carefully, creating a constant state of vigilance. What was once a normal everyday routine had transformed into a carefully managed operation, requiring thought, planning, and attention to small details. One afternoon, the neighbor went further by confronting a visitor directly. A family member had come for a short visit, unaware of the ongoing tension. The neighbor approached them with a sharp tone, pointing at the driveway and insisting they could not park in a certain area. The visitor, confused and slightly intimidated, complied, but quickly turned to the homeowner for reassurance. It was a sobering moment. The homeowner realized that the conflict had begun to affect others, drawing innocent people into the tension. This added a layer of responsibility, making it clear that the situation needed resolution sooner rather than later. The homeowner decided to gather all possible evidence. Over the next few weeks, every note, every obstacle, and every confrontation was documented. Photos, videos, and written accounts were meticulously organized. Witnesses, neighbors who had seen confrontations or unusual activity, were asked to provide their observations. The homeowner understood that if this dispute escalated further, having clear, undeniable evidence would be essential. It was no longer about arguing on the street. It was about creating a record that could stand in a formal setting. Despite these preparations, the neighbor continued her campaign. Her actions were no longer limited to the driveway. She began contacting local authorities, making exaggerated claims about safety violations and obstruction. Each call required a response, and each response needed to be carefully documented. The homeowner realized that ignoring the neighbor would no longer work. Attempts to reason politely had failed. The neighbor had chosen a strategy of control, intimidation, and escalation, and it had to be met with preparation, facts, and patience. The tension in the neighborhood also became more noticeable. Conversations among other residents now included hushed comments about the ongoing conflict. Some sympathized with the homeowner, while others were quietly wary of the neighbor's behavior. Children who once played freely near the street became more cautious, often avoiding the area near the driveway. It was subtle, yet it highlighted the extent to which one person's behavior could impact a whole community. The homeowner felt a sense of responsibility, not only for property, but also for the larger environment. Understanding that maintaining peace required careful action. One particularly tense evening, the neighbor attempted to block the driveway entirely with a set of temporary barricades. She stood nearby, watching the homeowner approach. Calmly, the homeowner removed the barricades and moved them to the side, making it clear that interference would not be tolerated. The neighbor's expression shifted from confidence to irritation, as though the predictable response had been disrupted. It was a reminder that patience, preparation, and composure could be more powerful than anger or confrontation. Every measured action demonstrated that control could not be. Seized by intimidation alone, the homeowner also began seeking advice from legal sources, learning more about property rights, harassment laws, and procedures for formal complaints. Every interaction with authorities was carefully logged. The more the homeowner learned, the more confident and prepared each response became. It was not about retaliation. It was about protecting personal rights and establishing clear boundaries that could be recognized formally if needed. Knowledge became a tool for calm, effective action. Neighbors continued to witness the conflict from a distance, some offering quiet support. A few delivered words of encouragement or simply acknowledged the homeowner with a sympathetic smile. Others maintained distance, uncertain how to respond to someone so determined to create tension. The homeowner understood that maintaining dignity and composure in front of an audience, even a silent one, was crucial. Each day became a test of restraint, strategy, and the ability to maintain calm under pressure. Despite the increasing difficulty, there were small moments of satisfaction. When the homeowner calmly moved obstacles or politely explained the legal situation to visitors, there was a sense of accomplishment. Each successful interaction without conflict reinforced the idea that patience and preparation were effective. The driveway, once a source of minor annoyance, it's become a proving ground for persistence, careful thought, and measured responses. The neighbor, however, showed no signs of relenting. She continued to patrol the street visually, left notes, and attempted to assert authority wherever possible. Every action was calculated, designed to provoke a response. Yet the homeowner remained vigilant, refusing to be drawn into emotional reactions. Each day became a careful balancing act, addressing interference, documenting incidents, and maintaining peace of mind. It was exhausting, yet necessary. The homeowner realized that perseverance and clear thinking would be the ultimate tools to resolve the conflict. One morning, a minor confrontation occurred when the neighbor attempted to instruct a delivery driver personally. The homeowner calmly intervened, explaining that the driveway was private property and showing evidence of its legality. The driver, reassured, followed the homeowner's instructions. The neighbor, frustrated, muttered under her breath, but could not produce any valid reason to continue her interference. It was a clear demonstration that facts, preparation, calm persistence could override intimidation. As weeks passed, the situation grew into a constant vigilance exercise. The homeowner kept a routine of morning inspections, careful documentation, and courteous explanations to visitors. Each day involved small but significant decisions about how to respond, when to engage, and when to let minor provocations pass. The driveway, a simple space that had once been part of everyday life, had become a stage where patience, strategy, and resilience were tested. The homeowner also began reflecting on the neighbor's behavior. It was not simply a matter of rules or property. It was about the desire to dominate, to control situations regardless of facts. Understanding this allowed the homeowner to approach the problem more strategically. Emotional reactions were avoided, while calm responses, careful documentation, and patience became the primary tools. It was a lesson in restraint, showing that measured actions could neutralize even the most determined attempts at intimidation. By the end of this period, the homeowner had grown more confident. The neighbor's attempts to control the driveway were no longer as intimidating because the homeowner was prepared. Evidence was organized, patterns of behavior were documented, and responses were measured and deliberate. What had begun as a series of minor conflicts had transformed into a structured approach to handling unreasonable behavior with calmness and preparation. Part 3 closes on a note of both tension and readiness. The neighbor had escalated her actions to direct interference, involving visitors and creating daily challenges, yet the homeowner had adapted, learning to respond calmly, document carefully, and maintain control over personal space and boundaries. The stage was set for the next phase of the conflict, where the limits of patience and strategy would be tested further, and the possibility of formal resolution became increasingly real. The tension that had been building for weeks finally reached a point where it could no longer be managed through patience and polite explanations alone. The homeowner realized that the neighbor's behavior was not going to stop voluntarily. Every day brought new obstacles, confrontations, and attempts to assert authority over the driveway. What had once seemed like a minor annoyance had grown into a situation that required a formal response. It was time to involve the authorities and let the facts speak for themselves. The first step was visiting the local courthouse to learn about legal options. The homeowner spoke with clerks and advisors, explaining the situation in detail, providing the history of notes, obstacles, and confrontations. Each interaction reinforced the importance of evidence and documentation. The neighbor's pattern of behavior, from leaving notes to blocking the driveway and intimidating visitors, needed to be presented clearly and methodically. The homeowner carefully organized photos, written records, witness statements, and even video evidence showing the neighbor's interference. Once the homeowner felt prepared, formal complaint was submitted. It was not filed in anger, but as a necessary step to protect property rights and personal boundaries. The process was meticulous, requiring patience and attention to detail. Every piece of evidence had to be labeled, every incident dated, and every witness listed. The homeowner understood that the court would only respond to facts, not feelings, so clarity and precision were essential. It was a new phase of the struggle, moving from personal confrontations to a structured legal process where rules and laws governed outcomes. The neighbor, upon learning of the formal complaint, did not react with restraint. She immediately contacted the court as well, presenting her version of events with confidence and insistence that the driveway was somehow infringing upon her rights. Her tone and demeanor suggested she expected a swift resolution in her favor, certain that her sense of authority would carry weight. But the homeowner had anticipated this. With thorough preparation, the case was clear. The driveway was legally part of the property. All actions by the neighbor had been documented, and there was ample evidence of harassment and interference. The first hearing day arrived, bringing a mix of anxiety and determination. Walking into the courtroom, the homeowner felt the weight of weeks of tension, planning, and preparation. The room was formal and serious, with the judge presiding over the proceedings. The neighbor appeared confident, speaking quickly and with authority, presenting her claims as facts, while the homeowner responded calmly, relying on organized evidence and clear explanations. Each photograph, note, and witness account was presented methodically, The contrast between emotion-driven claims and fact-based presentation became increasingly apparent. Witnesses called to the stand reinforced the homeowner's account. Neighbors who had observed incidents spoke clearly about the notes, obstacles, and interference. Delivery drivers and visitors described confusion and minor confrontations caused by the neighbor's actions. The cumulative effect was undeniable. The neighbor's behavior had been deliberate, disruptive, and inconsistent with any legal authority. The courtroom atmosphere shifted subtly as the facts unfolded, highlighting the importance of preparation, patience, and clear documentation in resolving conflicts. The neighbor attempted to argue her position aggressively, claiming safety concerns and property rights that did not exist. She pointed to minor details, exaggerating their significance, and suggested that the homeowner had been unreasonable in responses. But each argument was carefully countered with evidence: maps showing property lines, city permits for the driveway, photographs of obstacles placed by the neighbor, and written records of notes and confrontations. It was a meticulous process, with every claim examined and weighed against facts. The judge, observing both sides, began asking pointed questions. Questions about permits, property boundaries, and specific incidents revealed inconsistencies in the neighbor's story. Statements made earlier were contradicted by witnesses or documentation. The homeowner remained composed, answering clearly and confidently, presenting facts without emotion or embellishment. It was clear that the neighbor's reliance on perception and personal opinion could not compete with documented evidence. Each answer, each piece of evidence, reinforced the homeowner's case and highlighted the neighbor's lack of credibility. During a recess, the neighbor seemed visibly frustrated. For the first time, the realization that confidence and aggression alone were insufficient became apparent. The homeowner, while anxious, remained calm, reviewing notes and evidence to ensure readiness for the next session. It was a moment of reflection, recognizing that patience, preparation, and consistency had brought the situation to a point where the law could intervene effectively. What had been weeks of stress, confrontation, and careful planning were now paying off. When the hearing resumed, the presentation of evidence continued. Video footage clearly showed the neighbor placing obstacles in the driveway, interfering with visitors, and leaving notes intended to intimidate. Witness testimony confirmed each incident, describing the impact on daily routines and social interactions. The courtroom dynamic made it increasingly clear that the homeowner's approach, calm, methodical, and evidence-driven, was the correct path to resolution. Emotion, aggression, or personal opinion carried little weight compared to documented facts. The neighbor's attempts to assert authority became increasingly frantic. She repeated claims that were already addressed by evidence and witness statements. Each repetition highlighted the difference between assumption and reality, emphasizing the importance of documentation and calm reasoning in legal matters. The homeowner remained focused, responding with clarity and consistency, understanding that restraint and preparation were far more powerful than confrontation or anger. By mid-afternoon, the judge had reviewed all presented evidence thoroughly. Questions focused on property ownership, legality of the driveway, and the neighbor's actions. Each answer given by the homeowner reinforced the legal and factual basis for the driveway's existence and highlighted the neighbor's repeated interference. The courtroom was quiet, attentive, and deliberate. Every statement mattered, and every piece of evidence contributed to a clear picture of the situation. The turning point came when the judge directly addressed the neighbor, asking for specific legal justification for her actions. The neighbor faltered, unable to provide concrete evidence, permits, or documentation. Statements about safety concerns and property rights were contradicted by city records and testimony. The contrast was undeniable. The homeowner had consistently relied on facts and preparation, while the neighbor had relied on assumptions, personal belief, and attempts at intimidation. It became increasingly evident that the law favored the evidence-based approach. The homeowner felt a sense of relief, tempered by the seriousness of the proceedings. Legal resolution was not instantaneous, but the clear presentation of facts, witness statements, and documentation had shifted the balance. The neighbor's reliance on control, intimidation, and personal perception could no longer influence the outcome. The courtroom, once intimidating, now felt like a place where fairness and facts determined the final decision. Throughout the hearing, the homeowner remained composed, speaking clearly, responding politely to questions, and presenting evidence methodically. There was no anger, no exaggeration, only calm and factual clarity. Each piece of evidence reinforced the homeowner's case, showing that preparation, patience, and adherence to the law could resolve even the most persistent attempts at harassment. It was a demonstration of how careful, deliberate action could overcome intimidation. After several hours of testimony, review, and discussion, the judge delivered a clear message. The neighbor's actions had been deliberate, disruptive, and unsupported by law. The driveway was confirmed as the homeowner's legal property. The neighbor was instructed to cease interference immediately. Any future attempts to block the driveway, intimidate visitors, or place obstacles would be considered harassment, with legal consequences. The ruling was precise, leaving no ambiguity. The homeowner's preparation, patience, and calm reasoning had led to a fair and definitive outcome. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted as the ruling was delivered. The neighbor, who had attempted to assert control and authority, appeared frustrated and silent. The homeowner, while relieved, remained composed, understanding that the ruling marked the culmination of careful planning, evidence collection, and consistent restraint. Weeks of tension, confrontation, and daily vigilance had led to a clear resolution, demonstrating that facts and preparation could overcome aggression and intimidation. As the hearing concluded, the homeowner gathered belongings and left the courtroom, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. What had begun as minor annoyances, notes, verbal comments, and small obstacles had escalated into a formal legal dispute. Yet, through patience, careful documentation, and adherence to facts, the situation had been resolved fairly. It was a lesson in resilience, strategy, and the power of remaining calm and prepared even in the face of persistent provocation. Back at home, the neighborhood seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The ongoing tension that had affected children, neighbors, and visitors began to ease. The homeowner returned to daily routines, morning coffee, and quiet reflection on the porch. While vigilance remained necessary, the legal ruling provided a sense of security and peace. The driveway, once a source of stress and confrontation, was now firmly recognized as part of the homeowner's property, and the neighbor's attempts at interference were officially curtailed. The homeowner also reflected on personal growth through the experience. Patience, strategic thinking, and clear communication had been essential. Remaining calm in the face of provocation, carefully documenting incidents, and presenting facts consistently had turned a frustrating and stressful situation into a manageable and ultimately victorious one. It was a reminder that even the most persistent attempts at control could be countered through preparation, resilience, and adherence to facts. Neighbors continued to observe the situation from a distance. Noticing the shift in energy and behavior, some offered quiet congratulations or words of encouragement, while others acknowledged the homeowner with sympathetic smiles. The street returned to a semblance of normalcy, with children playing, deliveries arriving without delay, and the small rituals of everyday life resuming their previous rhythm. The homeowner's careful and measured approach had restored order, respect, and peace to what had once been a tense and disruptive conflict. Part 4 closes with a sense of resolution and preparedness. The neighbor had faced the consequences of deliberate interference, while the homeowner had demonstrated the power of calm, strategic action supported by clear evidence. The struggle had been long, stressful, and challenging, but it had also been an opportunity to show resilience, patience, and the importance of defending personal boundaries. The stage was set for the final part, where the long-term effects of the conflict and the restoration of peace could be explored, concluding the story with clarity and closure.